The Stolen Lake by Joan Aiken. 3. On his return to the White Hart, Captain Hughes was informed by a waiter that 2 modists had arrived and were waiting in the young lady's bedchamber to take measurements. "Aha! Then that frowsy female spoke the truth. So far, so good," he exclaimed. "I will step upstairs and give them their orders. Meanwhile, you may have a luncheon prepared for me and serve it in the coffee room. Is there a mayor in this town?" "Yes, sir, the Jefe, Don Luis Price." "I will wait for him as soon as I have finished my repast. Come along, child, make haste," he added to Dido, gesturing her to precede him up the shallow, polished wooden stairs. The White Hart appeared to be a very old building. The floors were black with age, and the upper story was a maze of small dark rooms and passages, with steps up and steps down and very little light coming in from tiny windows. There were thick cobwebs hanging from the rafters. Dido, not fond of spiders, recalled the captain's catalogue of Newcumbrian fauna had included 7-inch ones able to leap 30 feet. She hoped there were none of that kind in the White Hart. In Dido's room, 2 ladies were waiting, seated on a wooden chest by the window. An enormous pincushion the size of a saddlebag lay between them on the chest, together with a massive glittering pair of scissors and a 2-yard mahogany rule. The seamstresses stood up and curtsied respectfully to Captain Hughes. They were dressed alike, in the black, stiff gowns that seemed to be standard guard for the women of Tenby, with white ficus and white frilled caps. But in other respects, they were as different from each other as possible. Dido took an instant dislike to both. One was small, aged, skinny, and wrinkled. The other big and buxom, with a thick shock of coarse black hair escaping from under her cap and hanging halfway down her back. Each had a velvet pincushion fastened to her fichu, and a tape measure attached to her belt. Both looked very attentively at Dido. "Are you the needlewoman recommended to be my Mrs. Brandywind?" inquired the captain. "Yes, Captain, I'm Mrs. Morgan," said the little old one, smiling. When she did, she revealed the fact that she had no teeth at all, which made her smile rather like that of a lizard. "And this here is my daughter, Mrs. Vavasour." The younger woman also smiled. "So this is the young lady who needs fitting out." Her pitying, disdainful glance swept over Dido's salt-stained breeches, frayed collar, darned socks, and scuffed brogans, one of them with a loose buckle. "Ah, pretty as a pink pale blossom she be," cooed Mrs. Morgan, in a voice that did not match the expression in her sharp little black eyes. Dido was resigned to her own looks. She knew that she had a pale, pointed face, freckled like a musk flower, pale, observant gray eyes, and short, stringy brown hair. "They were trying to gammon me," she decided, "but I'm not a-going to let them." She stared coldly back at the 2 dressmakers while Captain Hughes gave them their instructions. "The young lady will be among the British party attending the court of Queen Ginevra to pay their respects to Her Majesty. I wish the child to be fitted out with 2 gowns suitable for a young person of her age and station to wear at court, besides slippers, sashes, kerchiefs, whatever is needful. Can you do that?" Certainly, Captain," Mrs. Morgan curtsied again. Mrs. Vavasour said, "Both gowns ought to be white, mull for daytime wear, a round gown over a silk petticoat, embroidered with cattails and turkey work, and," stuck in her mother, "French knots round the neck, and the border round the sleeves embossed, a pink sash. Then for evening wear a white silk taffy gown, pinstriped with cream, and a lace petticoat, a sash of the same, embroidered with silver sequin fronds. She'll look like a hangle from heaving, that she will." Very well," said Captain Hughes testily. "That sounds suitable enough. I know little of such matters, so cut be plain and neat, nothing fussy or over-trimmed. Can you have both gowns be ready by tonight? We leave on the Dawn Riverboat tomorrow morning. Another glance passed between the two. Why, surely, Captain, cooed Mrs. Morgan. By midnight the work shall be done. The young lady will be fine as a bird of paradise. Willn't she, Nineveh? Gracious goodness, yes, indeed, smiled the younger woman. Dido could not decide which smile she disliked more, the bare gums or the flashing silver teeth. How much will the 2 gowns cost? 100 byzants, Captain, and cheap at the price. Good God! Furbelows are costly in New Cumbria, it seems. He glanced at Dido as if wondering whether the outlay was worth it. She glanced back with equal resentment. Well, you shall be paid tonight. Beg pardon, Captain, said Mrs. Morgan respectfully but firmly. We has to be paid in advance. Mullen silk and taffety and lacings, them's costly stuff, let alone the floss and ribbing and trimmings. Pay us now, if you please, Captain. Oh, very well, I will send Mr. Windward up with the money directly. Be a good child now, miss, he said to Dido. What about when they're through measuring me, said Dido. Can I go out and see the sights? We shall be wanting you all afternoon, missy, said Mrs. Vavasour. For trying and fitting. What? Don't I get to see the sights? Not at all. Both sempstresses shook their heads. The streets of Tenby ain't safe for little misses, said Mrs. Morgan. Little girls has got lost and never come home to their own kitchens. Even in their gardens they ain't safe. You'd do best to stay with us, dearie. Mrs. Morgan shook her head warningly. Do as they say, child, said Captain Hughes. Then he was gone. Dido felt much aggrieved. Captain Hughes had not offered her a nuncheon, and she was decidedly hungry. Furthermore, she was by no means enthusiastic about the sound of her court appeal. White mull embroidered with cattails. I shall look a right Charlie in it, she thought glumly. And what possible use would it be on board ship? Might as well get it over with, however. Ain't you a-going to measure me? She demanded of the 2 women, who were indeed looking at her measuringly, but who made no move to take out their tape measures. In a twinkling, dearie, just a-waiting for the wampum. Wampum? The mish, the ready, spondylix, mint sauce, us don't work on credit, lovey. What a havey-cavey pair, thought Dido. I wouldn't trust them as far as I could toss an 18-pounder. Going to see the Queen, is she? There's a lucky young lady, said Mrs. Morgan, grinning. Indeed, goodness, yes, agreed her daughter. Many young ladies would give their eyes, wouldn't they? Nineveh. The eyes out of their heads? At this moment, Mr. Windward entered the room, bearing the captain's sharkskin money bag, from which he carefully proceeded to count out 100 gold bezants. The 2 women stopped laughing and watched him with close and avaricious attention, their eyes wistfully following the bag, when, having passed over the 10 little heaps of 10 coins, he tightened the strings, knotted them again, and took himself off. Hey, Mr. Windward, called Dido as he was about to leave the room. Well, young'un? Is Mr. Holystone downstairs? Is he busy? He is supervising the captain's repast. Do you wish me to give him a message? Just when he's free, I'd be obliged if he'd get someone to fetch me a bite of prog. I'm nibblish sharp set, Dido said disconsolately. Mr. Windward's long, serious face broke into a sympathetic grin as he looked at the 2 dressmakers waiting to start operations on Dido. He said, Very good, young'un. I'll tell him to have a bite sent up to you. The door clapped behind him. Well, now, listen to Miss Throw-a-Weight around, said Mrs. Morgan with strong disapproval. Acts as if she were Lady Attarde herself. Little girls ought to be seen and not heard. Us had best not waste no time, not a blessed minute. Just you step this away, dearie. Drawing their tape measures from their belts, both women urged Dido toward the window. Come here where the light's better, cooed old Mrs. Morgan, and Mrs. Vavasour said, See that pincushion, sweetheart? See all those pins in it? Can you make out what's writ there? A quantity of brass-headed pins were stuck into the fat cushion. They spelled out some word with a large number of X's in it. Dido, no great reader at best, shook her head. Study it a mite closer, dearie. See if you can figure it out. Both women had her by the shoulders now. They were forcing her head down on the pincushion. As it came closer to her face, she discovered that it had a strong, sweet, musky odor, somewhat resembling camphor, but much more powerful. Hey, let me go, she said, struggling, but already her head was swimming. Her voice seemed to come not out of her throat, but faintly from a long way off. That's a dandy now, then. Us'll just open this lid. With immense indignation, Dido realized that Mrs. Vavasour had tied her hands behind her with a tape measure, while Mrs. Morgan opened the lid of the chest. Surprisingly, this proved to cover and surround a kind of stairhead. A flight of narrow steps led down steeply from it into blackness. Now us'll just help the little dearie over the side. I'll not go, Captain Hughes! Captain Hughes will have your guts for garters when he hears of this, gasped Dido, doing her best to fight the two women who were half lifting, half dragging her over the side of the chest. Ah, but he won't hear you, lovey. Not as long as you're not till you're as lost as Lucy's pocket. You step down. Nineveh, hold her legs. Lucky she's such a skinny one. Her won't be no trouble to fetch to the boat. Dido was rolled down the steps. Mrs. Vavasour made no attempt to break her fall, and she lay half-stunned at the bottom of the fairly long flight. A moment later, she felt a thick blanket-like sack pulled over her legs and body. A string was drawn tight at the top, catching some of her hair painfully and tied in a knot. Then she felt herself being dragged along the ground over rough, uneven planks full of splinters, many of which pierced through the fabric of the bag, and also through Dido's skin. Her head and limbs were banged and thumped against the edges of boards. She was shaken and scraped and jounced and battered. One good result of this unpleasant exercise, however, was that after a few minutes of it, Dido, who had been at the start almost unconscious from the fumes of the pincushion, was jolted back into full, angry, and wary intelligence. Blister them, the old hag, she thought. I'll not yammer to let them know I'm awake. But what a gull I was! How could I be such a nodcock as not to twig their lay from the first minute? Any addle-pate could see there was a pair of downy ones. Guess I'd best look out for myself in New Cumbria. Captain Hughes ain't used to sich goings-on. He'll be no more use here than a thread-paper parasol in a thunderstorm. She had to bite her lips several times not to cry out, as she was ruthlessly dragged along. She wrestled against the tape that bound her wrists until it cut into them. She thought she felt it give a little, and so persisted in spite of the pain. Lay her out with me, Ma, and pull her down here, said Mrs. Vavasour's voice. The bag was given a sudden vigorous jerk. Again, Dido felt herself rolling helplessly over and over down a long, bumpy slope. By the time she came to a stop, she was too dazed and bruised to do anything but lie motionless. To her joy, though, the tape round her wrists had finally broken. She was able to move her hands. Where'll we lay her? Came Mrs. Vavasour's voice. There, on the dried fish. What about rats, Ma? Wouldn't do if her was to turn up gnawed. She oughtn't have 'em if they ain't complete. Something in the woman's voice made Dido's skin crawl. Also, she did not care for the reference to rats. Oh, very well, on the axe heads, then. The sack was hoisted up and dropped heavily onto a pile of sharp edges and hard corners. When's the boat leave, Ma? Midnight. Best you stay and keep an eye on the kitchen. Do she stir? Give her another whiff of Guyala. I stay here, not on your elephant. She'll not stir. Give her another whiff now. Make it certain. Not too much, then. She don't like 'em if they're droopy. The camphor fumes came close again. Dido tried to hold her breath. She pressed her lips together, wrinkled up her nose, and squeezed her eyes shut. Then, suddenly, she heard a man's voice raised in song. Not far away, the sound was muffled, as if heard through a thin partition, or a pile of objects. My heart goes pink, he sang. My heart goes pink the very minute I see her. My heart goes rose pink like the rising sun. And when she is nigh, this unmistakable feeling tingles all my senses, every one. I feel she is close, I know she is nigh. If I were in Paris, Geneva, or Rye, I'd quickly perceive her, my cherished Nineveh. Oh no, Dido heard Nineveh exclaim in a horrified whisper, "That's Bran!" And Mrs. Morgan snapped, "How the pest did he get here? I thought he were in the mountains." "Oh, whoever knows where he'll turn up. Quick, let's get out of here. Make haste, Ma. Never mind the little varmint. She'll be right enough. All right. Don't hurry, Miguel." From the sound, it appeared that Mrs. Vavasour was pushing her elderly parent up a flight of steps. There was a stumble and a smothered curse. Then a door closed with a rattle of bolts. This was followed by silence. Dido found herself in no great hurry to make a move. For one thing, she was not certain as to the whereabouts of the singer. The fact that this Bran, whoever he was, seemed to strike alarm into the dressmakers did not, Dido thought, necessarily mean that he would be prepared to help her. She was not going to risk being found by him. She would wait a while. She occupied the time by enlarging a hole in the sack, which had been torn as it was dragged along. At last she managed to get her head out, but could see little of her surroundings, for the light was very dim. She thought she must be in some cellar or storeroom of the White Hart. They sure got a big store, she thought. Seems as big as Covent Garden. By cautious rolling and slithering, she worked herself off the axe heads, which were very uncomfortable, and onto what felt like a pile of sacks or sails. That's better, she thought. Now I'll just rest me a few minutes, then I'll wriggle out of the sack. Croupus, how those old harridans did thump me along. Her head dropped back against the dusty sackcloth, and she slept. When Dido next woke, it was with a feeling of deep anxiety and apprehension. How long had she been asleep? Addlehead, she told herself. For all you know, it's nigh on midnight, and those old carrion crows will be coming back any minute. Why the pies did I have to go and fall asleep? Trying to make as little noise as possible, she wriggled clear of the sack and looked around her. Although it was darker now, her eyes were more accustomed to the dimness. She seemed to be in a large warehouse stacked with many kinds of goods. Farm implements, fodder, tools, seeds, bales, barrels, and crates. Narrow alleys threaded between the high piles. It was like a maze, and Dido tried several alleys before she found one that led her to a wall, in which she saw 2 or 3 small window squares high above her head. They were too small and too high to be of any use for escape. She edged her way along the wall, hastened on her way by certain squeaks and scurryings close by. There ain't no shortage of rats here, she thought, and was glad not to be fastened in a sack with her hands tied behind her. At last she reached a wide loading space by a pair of big double doors, plainly the main entrance to the store, but the doors were fastened, as was a little wicket cut through them. Dido began to feel annoyed. She was hollow with hunger, too. Old Cap'll be real mortalious when he wants to catch that boat and finds I'm missing, she thought. Peering up in the gloom, she discovered that the fastening of the double doors consisted of a long iron bar held in place by 4 massive staples. All I have to do is knock that out, she thought. But with what? It's out of my reach. But among all this mullocks of goods, there must be some that I can use. Her luck had changed. She discovered a pile of hay rakes not far away in the murk. Fell over them, in fact, and grazed her shin on the sharp tines. Just a job, she thought joyfully, rubbing her leg, and she pulled one free and returned to the door. It was impossible not to make a good deal of noise pushing the bar along through the staples. In for a penny, in for a pound, Dido decided, bashing away at her rake head. At least if those 2 hear and come back, I've got me summat to thump them with. They won't put me in a bag so easy next time. The bar fell to the ground with a clang of their own accord. The two great doors began to open slightly, disclosing a twilit scene outside. Inching her way through the narrow gap, Dido looked cautiously round her. She was amazed to find herself down on the quayside. Fancy, she thought. There must be a passageway right from the White Hart to the storehouse. Underground, maybe. Likely there's a bit of smuggling goes on in these parts. Dusk was falling fast. She must have slept for 2 or 3 hours. The quay was empty and silent, except for an occasional seagull pondering on a bollard. But, Dido was delighted to notice, only a couple of 100 yards from the buildings in which she had been imprisoned, floated the pinnace belonging to the HMS Thrust, still moored alongside the quay. Glancing both ways, Dido broke into a fast run. I'll ask one of the crew to see me back to the White Hart. Reckon that Vavasour was right in one thing, she said. This don't feel a healthy town to loiter about the streets alone. A couple of sailors were in the pinnace, doing something to the rudder. She halted them, panting as she came alongside. Hey-o, Solly and Tad, can I come aboard? Why, it's the supercargo, little Miss Dido. What be you a-doing down on the dockside? Thought you was with the captain dining on roast goose and gravy. He's a-calling on the mare, Dido replied, and I'm not supposed to be in the street by myself. Would one of you coves be agreeable to walk me back to the White Hart? The boatswain'd have us over a gun-barrel, Duck, if he come back and found us missing. He's in town buying nails. You'd best come on board till he gets back. Dido was about to accept this invitation when a man who had been limping slowly toward them came up behind her and said, "This the young lady wishes to be escorted to the White Hart. The young lady wishes to be escorted to the White Hart hostelry. I shall be glad to accompany her. I am going that way." The sailors had been working by the light of the 2 lanterns that hung in the rigging. Their yellow glow illuminated the face of a newcomer. Swelp me, he's a rum-gagger, Dido thought. Dare I trust him? He was indeed a very strange-looking individual. Tall, deathly pale, even in the gold light, as if he had been in prison 50 years, with great cavernous eye sockets, a long curved nose, a thin wide mouth, and a shock of snow-white hair. His clothes were black. A large white cockatoo sat on his shoulder, and he carried a triangular stringed instrument. He had a wooden leg. Dido was on the point of saying, "No thanks, mister," in the firmest possible way, when he halted her with an upraised hand. "You are about to refuse my offer. You are afraid of me." "No, I ain't," she retorted crossly, though she was a little. "It's just one doesn't trust a soul in this ramshackle town." "Spoken like a wise child, but you may trust me." "How can I be sure, mister? I've been gold afore," he sighed. "You may trust me because it is not in my power to harm. I can prevent harm sometimes. Sometimes not even that." Dido studied him a while longer. "That's what you say," she thought. He disconcerted her by reading her thought. "It is what I say, and it is the truth. I tell nothing but truth." Humph! Dido was still not at all sure that she trusted him, but there was something about him that pricked her curiosity greatly. He looked as if he knew such a lot. She had a notion that if he chose, he would be able to answer any question she cared to put to him. At last she said, "How do I know you ain't pals with that Paris nabbed me?" "Oh, how? How?" he exclaimed impatiently. "How do you know that 2 and 2 make 4, or that your name is Dido and your sister's Penelope? I know because I know, but I could explain for years, and you would still be in the dark." Dido was so amazed at this answer that after a moment, quite meekly, she said, "Reckon I'll go with you then, mister, and thank you kindly." Tad and Solly, reassured, returned to their work on the rudder, nodding in a friendly way to Dido as she walked off with the stranger. She said, "How do you know my name and my sister's, mister?" "You may call me Bran," he answered. "And I told you. I can't give you any explanation that you would understand. You must simply accept that I do know. Dido digested this in silence for a minute or two. At first she felt rather mortified. He must think her a ninny. And yet he seemed friendly enough. Then something came into her mind, and she exclaimed, "Your name's Bran?" "That is what I am called by some." "Was that you, then, singing a while ago, when I was shutting that place about your heart being pink?" He smiled and stroked the great white cockatoo, which at this time had been sitting as quiet as a stuffed bird on his shoulder. "Sometimes my heart is white, eh, Chanticleer?" The bird croaked gently and puffed up its feathers. "He sure is a big un," said Dido respectfully. Then she repeated, "Was that you singing?" "I was singing, yes. I am a jongleur." "What's that?" "A minstrel. I sing songs for a living and tell stories." Dido was interested. "That's a rare way to make a living." She thought again and went on. "If that's all you do, though, why was that pair of old witches so afraid of you? And if you know such a blessed lot, if you knew I was shut in there, why the blazes didn't you help me?" "What need?" Bran said. "I knew you would get out by yourself." "Mighty fine talk." "True talk." "Why was they scared?" she persisted. "They have good reason to fear me," Bran said. "And you too now." "Why me?" "For various reasons, but one reason why they fear both of us is that we have escaped from them, and are now on our guard." Dido reflected that this was true. "Did you escape from them, mister?" He smiled. "I was their prisoner for more years than there are hairs on your head." "Go on! You can't gammon me like that." But still smiling, he stroked the great bird, which suddenly spread its wings in a wide stretch, then folded them again. "I have been in the dark," said Bran, "listening to the drops that fell from the roof, till those drops had bored a hole deeper than thrice the height of Mount Catalonde. It was during that time that I made up my songs and my stories." "Could you tell me a story now, mister?" said Dido hopefully, as they started up the steep hill that led to the White Hart. She was walking rather slowly. Her bones ached, her bruises throbbed. She felt queasy from the effects of the poisonous pincushion, and hollow from hunger. But she added fairly, "I can't pay you for it, though. I guess you knows that, on account of you seem to know everything else about me." "I will tell you a story for love, then," Bran said, smiling. "It is about a stick. A young boy was the youngest of 12 brothers, and so his father thought little of him." Dido was interested at once, being the youngest of her own family. "When the oldest sons were grown," Bran went on, "their father gave them each a horse, a sword, and a suit of armor, and sent them out into the world. But to the youngest he gave nothing, saying, 'You are too undersized and puny. It would be a waste to give you armor.'" "What a blame shame!" said Dido indignantly. The youngest son, however, went into the wood and cut himself a stick, from which he made a hobby horse. And when he rode it, saying, "Fly quick, my stick," the stick flew up into the air and carried him wherever he wanted to go. "Coo!" said Dido. Riding on his magic stick, he was able to rescue his elder brothers, who were in great danger just then, and he also killed a dragon and saved a princess and performed other feats, and was rewarded with fame and riches. But the day came when he started riding on the stick merely to astonish people and get their applause. He did it in the marketplace for money, like a circus rider. "Dunno as I blame him," said Dido. "No, but after he had done this for some time, the stick lost his power, and by degrees he lost all his wealth. Finally he was reduced to stealing and other bad ways, was imprisoned, and in the end sentenced to death." Dido heaved a sigh, but said nothing. His brothers would not help him. His eldest brother was now king of the country, and at last, since the condemned man was, after all, his brother, he sent a message that on the night before his execution, the prisoner might have anything that he wished. I'd have wished to be let out. Anything but that. So what did he wish? He asked that someone should go to the wood and cut him a stick. Did they? A stick was brought to his cell, and the prisoner, who now, through wild living and vice and despair, looked like an old bent man, mounted trembling on the stick, and said, "Fly quick, my stick, carry me away." "And did it?" said Dido eagerly. "Here we are at the White Hart," said Bran. "Good night," Dido twanged. "But, mister, hey, the end of the story, did it carry him?" She heard a laugh in his voice as he said, "We shall meet again." Then he disappeared into the darkness. Dido went gingerly into the White Hart. For all she knew, the two dressmakers would be somewhere about, waiting to waylay her again, but luckily the first person she saw was Captain Hughes, pacing about the hall with an expression of wrath and perturbation on his brow. When he saw Dido, he pounced on her and almost shook her. "Miss Twite, where the deuce have you been? We've had the whole place turned upside down searching for you. How dare you go out when I forbade you to?" "Here, hold hard, Cap," said Dido aggrievedly, rubbing her bruised arm where he had gripped her. "Don't you go a-banging me now. It were that dicey pair as call themselves dressmakers. They took and abducted me." "Balderdash! Do not seek to pull the wool over my eyes, miss. Fabricate me no Banbury stories." "Wool? It were a blasted pin-cushion. Not any fabrico-cushion. Not any fabric-concoction," Dido was beginning indignantly when Mr. Holystone came down the stairs. His face broke into a beaming smile of relief at the sight of Dido, and he exclaimed, "There you are. We have been so concerned about you." "I was nabbed," Dido repeated, and encouraged by Mr. Holystone's sympathy and evident belief, she poured out the story of what Mrs. Morgan and Mrs. Vavasour had done to her. Taking the two men to her room, she pointed to the chest which contained the secret entrance. "It does not open," said the captain, trying it. "It is nailed shut. This must be pure invention." Mr. Holystone, however, pulled out his clasp knife and prized open the lid. The stair inside was revealed. On it lay a tuft of Dido's brown hair, a scatter of pins, and the buckle from her left brogan. "Good God!" Captain Hughes was aghast. "Then the child's tale is true. This is atrocious. An outrage. Where was this warehouse child? On the dockside? I shall have the constables summoned. Those two women apprehended. Where is the innkeeper?" He strode toward the door, turning round to bark. "Do you keep watch over the child, Holystone. Don't let her out of your sight for a single instant." "I say, Mr. Holy," said Dido as the captain clattered off down the stairs, shouting for the landlord, officers of the watch, Bow Street runners, and justices of the peace. "I say, I ain't half hungry." "You poor child, you must indeed be famished. Come down to the inn parlour, and I will bespeak a meal." In the parlour, a pleasant, shadowy panelled room, they found a fire burning, for the temperature of New Cumbria, hot during the day, dropped abruptly once the sun had set. Mr. Holystone summoned a waiter and ordered food for Dido. While it was being prepared, she told him her story in greater detail. He shook his head. "I doubt if those two women will be caught. They have probably discovered by now. They managed to escape, and would have made themselves scarce. They may be miles off." Dido was inclined to agree. A bowl of oyster stew arrived with some thin cassava biscuits. While she was hungrily eating this, Mr. Holystone told her of the captain's meeting with Mr. Price, the mayor or jefe of the town. What the mayor told him was one reason for his being so distressed over your absence. It seems that the rocks, or aurochs, the great birds that live in the mountains, fly down over the town at early dusk and carry off many children, especially girls. There is great danger for young persons who go out alone. "That's why old Brandy Blossom is leaving town, then," observed Dido, carefully wiping her stew bowl with a piece of cassava. So the little angel won't be swiped by an auroch." "But how does those two hags come into this business, I wonder? If I'd been found missing, Captain Hughes would have thought an auroch got me. But them two ain't aurochs, unless they're in the catering way, selling tasty tidbits to the aurochs." A sizzling shark steak was brought in, garnished with peppers and slices of lime. About to commence eating, Dido paused at the sound of a heart-rending, famished mew, which seemed to come from under the oak settle on which she was sitting. She looked down. A thin golden cat had emerged from under the seat and was stretched up beseechingly, with both slender paws on her knee. "Why, it's Dora! How in tarnation did she get here? Reckon she followed you, Mr. Holy?" Dido put down a good-sized morsel of shark. The ravenous cat caught it with both paws before it reached the ground and set upon it avidly. "No, that is not Dora," said Mr. Holystone, carefully inspecting the animal. He rubbed a gentle thumb between the copper ears and tufted eyebrows. "My cat has a little silky curl just here in the middle of her forehead, and this one has none." "This one's thinner than Dora, too," agreed Dido, feeling the bony ribs and dropping another piece of shark. "But ain't that rum, to find one so similar? Are we close to your land, then, Mr. Holy? Or is cats like that common all over Rome and America?" "We are not so far from high Brazil," he said, sighing. "But cats such as this are not so frequently met with. They generally belong to rich people, the nobility. How now, what have we here?" Around the cat's neck, his stroking fingers had discovered a thin-plated collar with a leather disc and a tiny packet attached to it. The disc said, "Tit-and-Tatten." Mr. Holystone, feeling the collar, uttered a soft exclamation. "This collar is made from human hair," he said. "Holy snails! Someone ain't half got long hair. Must take a deal of combing out," Dido said, running her fingers through her own short locks. "Does the packet give the owner's name?" She set down her plate with the rest of the shark steak. The cat was too interested in this bounty to object to the removal of its collar, and Mr. Holystone unfolded the little packet with careful fingers, while Dido went on to a final course of pineapple and pawpaw. "My, ain't that tasty! What's the paper say, Mr. Holy?" He was frowning over the little square. It was a tiny printed page. "B. The animal that makes honey. Remarkable for its industry and art. Beldam, an old woman, generally a term of contempt, marking the last degree of old age with all its faults and miseries. Cat, a domestic animal that catches mice, commonly reckoned by naturalists the lowest order of the leonine species." "That's rummy," said Dido, looking over his shoulder. What did a person stick that in a collar for? B. Beldam cat. What do you make of it, Mr. Holly? It looks like a page from a dictionary." "It is a dictionary, if I mistake it not. It is Dr. Samuel Johnson's Dictionary of the English Language. Why would someone stick it in a cat's collar?" Dido took the paper from him and stared closely at the printed lines. "Looky here," she said. "Somebody made marks here and there, see? Like it might be with a thumbnail under some of the letters. Think that means something? Look here, in animal there, and in remarkable ARRABE. ABE, I believe you hit on something." Mr. Holystone wrote down the letters on the table, for he kept for noting good receipts. Holystone wrote the letters on the table he kept for noting good recipes. Arabi Lamai. What the blazes is that? Arabi, Elamai. They are two of the children of silence. Children of silence? The mountains that lie between New Cumbria and Lyonese, Ambridge and Arabi, Etane and Elamai, Erike, Damask, Damiac, Pounce, Pampol, Garrus, Galais, Calabi, and Catalonde. What a deal you know, Mr. Holly. But what's this last one? Ellen, is that a mountain too? No, it's not a mountain, said Mr. Holystone, looking very troubled indeed. Ellen is a girl's name. And that is the end of chapter 3.